Hello, Ben Frederick here for another installment in the Ben Asks discussion series. I'm delighted to have Brian Calley with me today. We're going to be talking about civility in public life, and honestly, just generally civility and how we exchange in all facets, because sadly, public life has all too often seeped into personal life and family, and the amount of division that we've seen in recent months and years, unprecedented in some of the aspects of how that's affecting people's lives. Brian is a former lawmaker, former state representative. He's also the former lieutenant governor for Michigan, having served 8 years in that role. And now he's the president of the Small Business Association of Michigan, which is the largest business association in our state. Welcome, Brian.
Thanks, Ben. Great to be with you, and such a timely topic. I mean, it is, it does seem like politics has infiltrated into every single aspect of our lives, and so while civic engagement is, it's great to see it on the rise, the deterioration of relationships between people, it's concerning.
No question. And I know we'll get into that in more detail as we talk through. But before we start that, why don't you just give a little bit about yourself? I'm always curious about what sparks a person's own interest in public service, if you want to talk about that a little bit. But just if you could just give us a little bit of background.
Well, I've always been interested in politics. In my family, growing up, you didn't avoid conversations about politics and religion and money. I mean, that was Thanksgiving around the dinner table, epic debates I remember between my dad and his siblings and my grandfather, and so I kind of grew up in the middle of a political discussion. It seemed very natural, and it was interesting. And, people that literally grew up in the same household that could be so different from each other, and so I was tuned into the political conversation real early, but that wasn't the path that my career took. I got into financial services early. When I was still in high school, I had this job at a local bank, and I thought this would be a good summer job, when I'm between high school and college. And 10 years later, I was still in banking, and so it was a great career. But while I was in banking, I ran for a county commissioner position, and that was my first elected office. So I was a volunteer. I was real active with the Ionia County Republican Committee, was the treasurer and was the chair of that organization as well, and volunteered, knocked doors, and did the parades and all that kind of stuff. But my job was a banker. And then a friend of mine was elected to the Board of Commissioners, and she said, we don't have anybody with strong financial know-how on the board. It's the county's growing a lot. It needs really a revamped accounting system. And what do you think? I didn't even know who my county commissioner was at the time. I paid attention to state level politics and national politics especially, but not local. And so I literally had to look up who my county commissioner was. He was ready to retire. So when I ran, get this, I was unopposed in both my primary and my general election. And I must say, I highly, highly recommend unopposed elections. So my first entry into politics was that. And 7 people on the Board of Commissioners. Most things were 7-0, but really, me and 3 other people could really make things happen. And so I was really excited about what I was able to do on the board with the other commissioners, and that was really what sparked the interest, where I thought, at this time, so that was 2002 through 6, and Michigan was in dire straits at that time, and had no idea how bad it was going to get in the years ahead. But our state was in a single state recession for many of those years, and after 9/11, the whole nation went into a recession, and then most of the nation came out, but not Michigan. And so I thought, I had a lot of success at the county level. I'm going to run for state office, and so that's really what started. At that point, I left banking to campaign full time, and won that position. It's a Republican seat, still is today. It's one of the areas of the state that really hasn't changed that much. It was generally Republican back then. It's still Republican seat now. So the primary was the big contest, and it was a bruiser. That was a tough, that was a really tough experience. I still, like, when I talk about it now, I feel this little kind of, because,
Yeah.
as you're watching the mailbox and what's the next attack piece going to be, that kind of stuff. So my first entree into politics at that level was, it was a tough one. It made quite an impression, and it did have an impact on how I approached relationships and elections going forward, for sure.
Well, speaking to that, because I came into politics myself, the local level, a couple of years after that. So immediately faced with the realities of the Great Recession and um, housing crash, we have a choice to make as public officials whether we want to kind of be a part of the morose, message out there about doom and gloom, or if we're trying to be inherently optimists and try to celebrate, what good things are still happening, what good things can happen. So I'm interested in your thoughts on, how do you feel the political dialogue has changed, or the space for constructive dialogue going back to that era, even, relatively about a 15-year difference. I certainly have seen substantial changes, but I'm curious what your thoughts are of how it was to engage in that landscape then versus now.
Well, respect and confidence in longstanding institutions was a lot higher back then. It seems like, and I'm 43 years old, so it's weird to talk about the old days. But really back in 2006, I mean, sure, people still complained about the media, but there was still generally a lot of confidence in the media at that time. There wasn't, you had different networks that had different kind of points of view, but they weren't as different as you see today, where you get a radically different impression depending on where you're drawing your news from. But the same about government. I mean, there was a healthy respect for government across the board. Even though you had some favor smaller government, some favored government involved in more things. That was kind of the political spectrum at the time. But the respect for the institutions was a lot higher. The confidence in the institutions was a lot higher back then. And so there really wasn't much of an anti-government type of a feel, even among the most conservative. And so that's one of the things that it really strikes me now, is that it's hard to if there's not kind of a standard that people can be confident in out there, then what's the outcome? And I think we're kind of seeing that outcome now, is where you can have 100 different definitions of the truth, and it's so easy to find backup for the version of the truth that you like best. And I think it further erodes that the confidence. And it's hard to find your way back from there. How do you win people back over when, in terms of having a respect for the kind of the standard institutions that provide some kind of structure for our society? Although one thing I have noticed, though, is that there is still a lot of confidence in local. So the more local something is, local media, local government, local officials. I mean, but the difference there is, there's no filter, right? You know these people. You literally can see them and talk to them, and they're humanized, and that might be part of the difference too, is that now the political system has gotten so good at dehumanizing the other side, like they're not also people, people with
Right.
feelings and opinions and some validity to their opinions too. That's the part that's the biggest part that's different, is loss of all of that. And how do we move forward, or how do we find a pathway of for lack of a better word, I'm gonna say unity, but it's not, we've never been totally unified. I mean, there's been fighting in politics going way back when. I mean, look at Alexander Hamilton, died in a duel. There's been really serious fighting going way back, but it does seem different. The divide seems different and more permanent today.
Yeah, you're certainly hitting on something I've noticed too, where it's no longer a disagreement. The other person in a discussion is assumed to actually be seeking your harm. So it's not just that I disagree with this person. I've seen more and more, this person's going to harm me is the assumption. And that idea of stepping into the other person's shoes to understand their views or understand the impetus of their views or their worldview is being lost. Now, part of why I wanted to have you on for this conversation is because you've been navigating this environment in high profile positions for several years. I've seen a consistency in how you've approached it. I haven't seen you take the bait, so to speak, on some of the more lazy bomb throwing rhetoric type opportunities. And I'm curious about the origins of some of that within you. Where were there things with your own background or role models, positive or otherwise, because sometimes a negative role model is equally impactful to a positive one. But are things that kind of shaped your persona or your approach that to keep it this consistent over the years?
Going back to that 2006 race, my primary, and there was this one experience I had there where there was a mailing that was sent out, and it took a series of things and kind of constructed a picture of me that I felt was very unfair. But I took heart thinking, well, people aren't going to just believe that just because somebody put it down. But then when I was at church, somebody at the church that I've known for a very long time asked my wife about the mailing and said, I just couldn't believe that about Brian. I didn't realize that he was like that. And it was like a punch in the face. Yeah. Like, boy, if a person that I know, right, just because there was like this thing like, well, they couldn't have just written it in there if it wasn't true. And really, people write things that aren't true all the time. I mean, it's like a standard bearer in political campaigns. So that was what it caused me to do was question a lot of the things that I believe and do I really know enough about, or really does that person actually have bad intentions? And so I sat out at that time. Republicans had lost the majority in the House of Representatives when I was first elected. So Democrats had the majority. And that was the case for all 4 years I was in the House. And I was from a rural county. There weren't a lot of people around me that had very different outlooks. I mean, they were raised in the same place. They kind of saw the world the same as I did. And so I went on at that time, a real journey to understand, boy, these people that seem like really smart, they must be pretty accomplished if they're able to make it through and get elected to a state office. Why have they come to the exact opposite conclusion as me on an issue? And so I just spent a little more time on a personal level getting to know people from very different places. And what I learned was that people that came to the opposite conclusion as me had perfectly good reasons for it. And it was so consistent that people had good reasons for coming to the opposite conclusion. Doesn't mean I changed my mind. It just means I understand now where they're coming from. And it's not some kind of crazy position. Like they've come to a reasonable conclusion based on their outlook, their experiences, their life, and all the things that culminated to that point. And so it was common enough to where I have a default position that when somebody is different than me, that they must have a good reason for it. And I'll be better if I can understand why. So that's that's really the mindset that I've taken from it. And it was partly came because I felt that I was misinterpreted. I was misunderstood. And if that was the case with me and it wasn't a fair portrayal, it's probably true about the people that I think the worst about because they're different.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm curious, as you look back on your career up to this point, are there times where you felt that collaborative approach worked particularly well I know it's not always easy if not everyone has the same, notions that you do as far as how they approach a situation or a process, even if you do. And are there times where, frankly, you let yourself down? Maybe you weren't you didn't honor that system that you'd kind of set up, and you saw a negative consequence.
Well, one thing I learned was that it takes very different coalitions to get different types of things done. And so the idea of making things happen when you're operating in the minority party in the legislature, well, your options are you can be loud or you can be effective, but it was really hard to be both. And so in fact, I think darn near impossible. And so I was frustrated when I was in the House because I felt like a lot of my job was making bad less bad. But I had a choice to make when tax reform was happening, or when one old tax code was scrapped and then the new one was put in place. And I knew that the outcome was not going to be something that I thought was great or even good. But I also had the ability to make bad less bad. And so I can look back and know that with the Michigan business tax, my engagement with it saved about 30,000 small businesses from that tax. And I could have just walked away from it. And my political life would have been way, way easier, because that's been a kind of a constant political attack on me since then, because the final outcome wasn't good. But working from the minority, I was able to make it less bad. And I felt the obligation, like I have to. So if I can make it so that this doesn't hit 30,000, at least 30,000 of them, how can I just walk away from that? And so that in that case, it was working with, understanding other people, kind of getting to the table through relationships and doing the best that I can, given the circumstances that are in front of me. Now, fast forward, when Rick and I were elected in the executive office, then it wasn't, at that point we could make good things happen. So it wasn't just take somebody else's agenda and try to improve upon it. In some cases, as little as making bad less bad. It was, we could make good things happen. So let's just scrap that entire tax code and do it the right way in the first place. So that's in most cases, that was a one coalition that came together to make that happen. But in 2011, to scrap the old tax code, pass one that makes us top 10, start the economic comeback of our state. 1 year later, we were doing autism insurance reform. Well, the coalition to make autism insurance reform happen was completely different. They were not the same players. If I had relied on the same people that supported the tax reform, it never would have happened. So it was a different type of coalition. And that's what I think is what we're in danger of losing right now, is that if we have a disagreement in one area, and that precludes us from having a relationship strong enough, or at least enough trust, to work together on a different area, then you can see how eventually nothing happens. And so those are a couple of cases where it really did take coalition building way outside my normal comfort zone, my normal cohort,
Yeah.
and it expanded the horizons.
And it's more of a regrets question maybe, but going back to the earlier, are there times where you feel you look back at something and say, I wish I would have approached that differently, or I let myself down in some way, as you talk about these structures for approaching tough issues?
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of examples of that. I mean, and a lot of times they happen in the heat of a campaign.
Hmm.
You feel like you took a sucker punch, and so you feel like you gotta answer back in kind. You hurt, so you gotta respond in the same way. And so, yeah, there have definitely been cases where I look back and think, whether I won or I lost. Most of the time I won, one time I lost. But in all of those cases, there are times when I look back at responses to being attacked where I think, I probably lost some of that. I'll go ahead and just call it testimony. That I lost some of the testimony of doing it the best way by letting the just the kind of the visceral reaction or
Yes.
response take over, and it felt perfectly justified at the time, and yet, looking back, it wasn't worth it. But thankfully, it's the exception, not the rule on that. But it's a tough standard. There's a Bible verse in Romans 12:18. For as much as depends on me, I'm to be at peace with others. So as the verse goes, as much as depends on you, be at peace with others. And I can't control others, but I also can't blame them for the way that I react to them. That is my decision. And so it's tough when it gets, you kind of lose your mind in campaigns sometimes. It gets just so intense.
I don't think people that have not been through a political campaign can appreciate the personal exposure that you have, your family has. You're pretty much being ripped up one side and down the other. You're just out there in the public square. And I agree with you. If I look back to my own regrets, the times that I've been inconsistent have usually been from a more emotion-based immediate reaction that with some temperance, with some thought, would have been quite different. And that's a natural segue into social media. When we talk about visceral reactions and some of the deterioration of exchange and communication. So I'm curious to get your thoughts. I have some strong thoughts on this, but I'm not the guest. But we've been able to evolve in our political lives, coming in relatively the same time, to see the emergence of social media as an increasing tool of politics, initially as a platform of exchange and debate and discussion. And I'd be curious just as your general observations on its evolution and positives and negatives.
Well, I recognized right after I was elected in 2007 that that there was a thing that at that time, believe it or not, it seemed pretty new, was Facebook.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember I got an email from a constituent, and it said, I can't find you on Facebook. Why aren't you on Facebook? And I said to somebody who's also named Ben, who worked for me all my time in office, and about 10 years younger than me. And I said, "Hey Ben, what is Facebook, and should I be on it?" And he said, "Yeah, actually, I think that'd be a good idea." And so that was the start of it. And then when I really started to understand the power of it when several years later. And so when when my daughter was in the hospital, I spent so much time out in 2010 out in the hallway making phone calls, updating people. I finally just decided, I told my family, I'm not calling any of you anymore. I'm not going to stand out in the hallway. I've got to be in with her. And so I just said, if you want to know what's going on, look at Facebook. I'm just going to put something on Facebook, and then you can see it there. And then I don't have to spend so much time out in the hallway. And it really it went, so it was my church family, it was my close family, and then it was friends, and then it was people I didn't know, and then it was churches all across the country, and I was like, wow, you can reach people without limit in social media. For me, it started as a matter of convenience.
Yeah.
And then I realized, like, wow, direct communication on a mass schedule at a rate I can afford. But now it's you can't really do without it. But I look back, I do, like, I love it. I'm on all the majors. I do a lot of communication through it. I like having a relationship and being able to connect with people. I am at that point where I wonder if it's worth it. I mean, as a society in general, the kind of group think that it leads to, cancel culture. The it's ironic because people get, in one way, it's like you've got this way to communicate, present yourself, and you feel like I can really be an individual. I can go out there and be the individual, and whatever's on my heart, whatever's on my mind, I can just put it out there, and it's a way that I can express myself. But what at least the way it appears to me, is that it is caused such conformity in people that, to be individual, you have to be like everybody else. To be successful in this, you have to kind of conform to the trend. And so I think that we've actually lost individuality because of it, not gained it. And I think it's the opposite of what many people perceive it to be, even the users, themselves, that are like, this is the way I can be individual. And yet, what happens is, communities naturally form, and the communities reinforce themselves and kind of, speak, act, and believe in uniform ways. And so there's not much individuality that comes out of it. There's not really as much creativity that comes out of it. At least not in the sense of the political world. There's a lot of really clever and entertaining and funny and inspirational things, and that's what keeps me coming back. So when I can stay in touch with people, I can know what's happening with people I went to high school with that I never see anymore, with family members that don't live close by. I mean, it's really, really a great tool, and that's why I'm going to stick with it. But the rest of it comes at a pretty high cost.
Well, that's certainly true, because we only have a certain bank of time and attention, and we're making choices each day about where we invest that time and attention. And I'm proud to say I've invested some of that in some nice little musical moments that you've shared with us, whether the Cheers theme song or some other things that are generally uplifting. I appreciate that. Again, I think that your social media presence has been affirming more than anything, and something that can hopefully multiply positivity and constructiveness. I think that we have a choice to make there. But that does lead me to a question about your own rules, because you've expressed some certain constructs that are interpersonal, like how you approach things, how you approach coalitions. What have you done for best practices, if you will, on social media engagement? Are there rules that you follow for yourself?
Well, don't post out of anger is number one. So, there have been plenty of times when I've had, something, I'll write it out, and then I'll think, if you have this kind of rule or discipline to think, okay, what's the best possible outcome from me engaging in this right now? And if you can't imagine it being positive, then why do it? I mean, there's and when I say positive, I mean making an impact. Is it going to help your cause? And if the answer is no, there's no possible way that's going to be the outcome. It's going to draw me into an argument, and I'm going to spend, all day being mad about or arguing with people that I don't know and don't really care about me. Like, is that really worth it? And then, but then the other thing, what I think, during a lot of ups and downs throughout the time and my time in office, some mountaintops and some valleys for sure. Sometimes people forget that public office holders, and I'm not one anymore, but people forget that public office holders are actual people. And so, people with families and struggles and hopes and dreams and aspirations. And so I tried to show that some, just behind it occurred to me one time, I was in my hometown of Portland pumping gas, and a lady came up to me once. She recognized me and said, she goes, "You're Brian Calley." And I said, "Yeah, I live here in Portland." And she said, "That's amazing. I can't believe that you pump your own gas." And I thought, who else would be pumping my gas? But it's just like, people really think if you hold a public office, you're driving around in a limousine and you don't, or you got servants and things. And, for me, I live, I'm in the basement of my house right now. I bought this house when I was 19 years old. And the only reason I qualified for the mortgage is because I worked at the bank. And, it's on a dirt road. It's a very modest house, but it's been good for our family. And so to me, it's, I know that there are like really rich people in politics, but it's not most of us. So, it's just like living this regular life. And so I do like to try to show that some, but I also want it to be uplifting and something that people will think is either funny or a bright spot or or something that keeps them going or something that gives encouragement. I want when somebody's going through their feed, when they come across something from me, I want it to either make them think, like to really consider, something like, oh, that's an interesting perspective, or that's a interesting background or story or history or
Right.
event, just something to make them think or make them laugh or make them feel but not feel mad. So that's really what my goal is to have that to whatever impression that it makes, for it to be something that is a positive thing in the day of the person that I'm that happens to come across my stuff.
Well, I think you've accomplished that to a large degree. I am curious, we're both special needs parents, and you're correct in some of the ways that we've almost created an alternative reality that's kind of self-sustaining in social media platforms. And it's particular temptation for special needs because you have a lot more visible milestones, that we would celebrate, that we notice the milestones more because we've kind of been navigating through this journey. But then I also looked at some of even when I was presenting with my children's advancement and said, it may be a disservice not to include the stumbles and not to include the challenges, so that other special needs families watching my content don't in some way feel diminished in their own journey. And the idea of opening up on some of the challenges, and maybe that's in your category of making people think. But I'm wondering how you navigated that. It's obviously a personal thing. We're opening up our lives, but I have found that when I've been a little bit vulnerable, that in large measure, people seem to appreciate that authenticity. You try to maintain it, but have you wrestled with that at all?
Yeah, I actually I wasn't crazy about the idea of getting involved in autism policymaking because I have a daughter with autism. I wasn't comfortable with it. I was, people saying, well, I was self-centered or what. And there's a man, he died a few years ago, but in politics that has an adult son or had an adult son with autism. And he said to me when I was elected lieutenant governor, actually before I was elected, but when I was on the ticket, and he said, there's this, we need to get this insurance reform passed for autism. And I know you don't want to like to tell your story for fear that people will say, well, it's just a self-centered thing, but nobody else is positioned like you're positioned, and there are tens of thousands of people who need your help right now. So you're just going to have to suck it up and do it. And so I was pretty scared to do it. But with that kind of tough talk encouragement, I did, and it was like a ton of bricks just lifted off, because there's so much pressure to I just like, everything's great, everything in my life is wonderful, look at the Instagram things. And so what if people found out that everything wasn't great? What if people found out that things are actually really, really hard? And so there's kind of a balance, because on the one hand, I wouldn't want to give people the impression that I would change anything about who my family is. But I also think it's important, especially when it comes to this idea of citizen legislator, like real people with real issues and real experience that take that experience into the public policy world and make changes. it's important. Those stories are important. And so to share it in a way that is authentic, but also constructive. And so that's the balance. And, there are funny, quirky things. I've got a million like funny and interesting stories about my daughter. I've got, there's other things that are really super hard. And the really super hard parts, I don't just share. I don't put those on social media. But when I'm talking to, parent groups, when I'm, among people that I think would be encouraged to know and hear about that story and how we've gotten to the point where we're at today. I don't shy away from telling it. So, I think there's a limit to how much it's appropriate to put out there on social media, but at the same time, I think it's just another form of building a community. And there's a huge community of people who have families that are just like mine, and it's very therapeutic to connect with them.
Yeah, I've certainly felt that too. And it's interesting because a number of politicians I know are really extroverted introverts. They're extroverts by necessity of what they see as their calling, but really in their personal habits, they're introverts. I tend to consider myself in that vein too. It was difficult for me to open up in the public square about my own story, my upbringing and things of that nature. It was really my wife that was encouraging me to, you know, be more open about my origin story and things of that nature, to allow for that authenticity, allow that connection to be made between me and those that I would hope to serve. And she was exactly right. But you're also right in that the situation, the setting, it has to make sense. It has to be a powerful ad in the work that you're doing. So I'm not going to give the same speech to the same audience in the same context, but if there's ways I can draw parallels or draw in individuals toward a common goal, I've seen it really work well. There was a documentary that was put out not too long ago called The Social Dilemma, as we're talking about social media still. And we both watched it. I'm curious on some of your impressions. I think any reasoned person would leave that documentary angry, but also reflective and maybe even a little bit scared, because you're seeing some of the things that are happening in the demands on your time and attention. When it comes to technology and it comes to decisions that are being made to, in effect, monetize your time and attention and your consumption of social media, your consumption of online resources, also tying into this confirmation bias process where you're getting an echo chamber of beliefs and the assumption that we used to make that let's say you and I were seeking out the same answer to a question, that we would naturally get the same type of input as far as reasonable sources. We can't actually take that for granted anymore. The stuff that I would see and what you would see would be based upon our underlying algorithms in large measure. So we might have a discussion on that topic later and wonder what the heck the other person is saying, because didn't they see the same thing that I did? The answer is actually maybe not. So I'm wondering about how you felt about the documentary, what impressions or that left you with, or goals, frankly, that left you with.
Yeah, and it gets back to this question of what is truth, and then who does your thinking for you? That's the part that it takes a certain amount of discipline to challenge what you believe to be true, and in the whole construct of social media is to channel you into, and I think they're quite good at this, is to channel you into a world that reinforces what your kind of what your point of view is. And so I came away with it with more determination than ever to find that other perspective and point of view, and to get it directly from people with different experiences. And that takes relationships. And the thing is, it's hard, because these days I mean, somebody like me, I've been a statewide Republican office holder. Even just it's hard sometimes because of that fact to get to a point where a person who's very different from me is even interested in having a conversation because there's certain kind of preconceived notions about it, and it's that have been reinforced so effectively, and these days mainly reinforced through social media. And it's they're just scary good at and it's not just, so you got the platforms themselves, but the people that make content have been are so good at like um, getting people to believe the worst about the opposite, about what's different. And so it's you can't fix it on social media, and yet it's addicting. It is addicting. And it can suck you in, but in the end, who's going to be left? It's one of the questions I always ask office holders, and a fair amount of candidates reach out and looking for some advice and or maybe support or something with a new candidacy. And my main advice is to just the same thing that happens to you when you take office. All of a sudden, your jokes are funnier. You're really smart. Everybody loves you in terms of inside that bubble, and you start to think it's real. And then what you find out after your time is up, and sooner or later everybody's time in office is up, you find out that it was those people's job to act like you were funny and smart and clever, and like that was their job, and they're really good at it too. Just like the whole constructs around um, what happens in digital communication is constructed to reinforce everything that you already want to believe. And so and whether you're on the far left or you're on the far right, these things are true about those constructs around us. And so you just have to have the discipline to get outside of it. And you can get some of it digitally. You can seek out other communities digitally, but I don't know, maybe I'm old fashioned. I just think there's no substitute for knowing people who are from different places and have had different life experiences than you. There's no substitute to that. And if the digital presence makes you distrust those people so much that you don't even want to engage with them, then I think we've lost something that is irreplaceable.
Well, you bring up an interesting point, describing yourself as old-fashioned, and we're roughly the same age, and we have from a generation that had an analog childhood and a digital adulthood. Without really having too much of a knowledge deficit, we can adapt to the technology. It's not as jarring to us because we were kind of there in formative years for that transfer from analog to digital. So for me as a child, I remember the phone being on the wall, but I also had a personal computer before I graduated high school. So there's that knowledge. And I mean, do you agree that there's a pivotal role that our generation has? And I mean, how can we be more effective in kind of bringing forward those truths from our childhood about relationships and true connection, and trying to recapture some of those things? And I'll ask it this way. I mean, how do we do it in a sustained way? I've seen well-meaning efforts to, quote, connect or do a bipartisan thing or a nonpartisan thing. And they just seem to, it's a great moment. But I haven't seen a successful, sustained effort like this. So it's kind of I know dissimilar questions here, but they tie together.
Yeah, and every generation points to the ones after them and say a bunch of knuckleheads. I mean that's a thing. Like every generation says that, but our Generation X, which it's funny to hear them say Gen Y, Gen Z, as though it had something to do with the placement in the alphabet. I mean, it was Generation X because they couldn't think of a better name, as in the algebraic sense, X. Like, well, we don't really have a name. Let's call it X. Um, but it's a small generation, and it's a generation that led the productivity revolution that has completely changed everything in the world. And it also straddles this transition into the digital world. And one thing I know for sure is we can't shame others into thinking that a phone on the wall is something nostalgic. They're never going to care about that.
Right.
But I think it's the part that is important is the human, what it takes to interact with other people, to experience and resolve conflict with other people. And this, in terms of, sustained and mass, I don't really know how we kind of change the construction of our society to get back to giving people experience with resolving conflict. But even like, I think about what it took. I'm married to one of your colleagues. Okay, so my wife is a state representative, Julie. We went to high school together in Ionia. And when I called Julie the first time, it was in the summertime, and she didn't really know me. She was in choir class with me. So I called her up and she wasn't home. The worst possible outcome was that her dad picked up the phone, right? Because there were no cell phones back then, or there were, but you couldn't afford them. They were thousands of dollars. So so I called her and her dad picked up the phone. I said, "Is Julie home?" And he said, "No." And I said, "Oh, well, would you tell her that Brian called?" And he goes, "I will." So I hung up the phone and I was like, "Oh, wait." She had like Brian who? Brian is like one of the most used names of the 1980s. Like, what? She's not going to know who that is. And it's because we never talked before, except for like, pleasantries at school. So I called back and I thought, oh, maybe her mom will answer, but no, her dad answered again. And I said, this is Brian. I just called a few minutes ago. I should have told you it's Brian Calley. Could you tell her that Brian Calley called? And she goes, and he said, "Yeah, okay, I'll let her know." And then I hung up the phone and I thought, my dad's a doctor. Our phone number is unlisted. She can't call me. So then I called a third time, and but imagine I'm like psyching myself up for this phone call. I'm mustering the courage to do it. There wasn't just, and then I called back and I left the number. And guess what? She never called. She never called me back. But anyway, but it was like a torturous, like 2-hour time period when I'm going through all this. And, but here's the thing is, today, like you're not talking to people, right? You're not facing people. You're interacting through, texting or there's something lost to what it takes to go into a situation that you're afraid of, and or there's conflict that is likely to happen, or you might get rejected, and you got to just suck it up and soldier on through it. And I think that the digital world makes kind of pot shot confrontation super easy.
Right.
And in real kind of conflict process, dealing with it, emotionally dealing with it, and
Yes.
then dealing with disappointment and rejection, or figuring out how to overcome obstacles and make things happen. That's the part that I think it's important to, like, I'm nostalgic about record players and all that stuff I grew up with, but I don't think it's important that people experience record players. What I think is important is that when people actually get together and that they have experiences together, and we
Yes.
can't just take the digital way out all the time.
Yeah, that's an important point, really. We talk about times of adversity in some cases as being critical to our own character formation. Stumbles that I've had in the past that are things that I learned from. And there is a lot more of a propensity to be able to isolate yourself from the very things that might actually be critical toward your character formation.
Yeah,
And
it's growth,
it
personal
is
growth
growth.
and experience.
But it's a bigger challenge. Obviously, it's tough to find an answer to. I mean, we're not going to be Luddites here. We're not going to just reject the technology and say we just we have to have some kind of a renaissance. I agree with you. That's not practical to just kind of have it be this wistful notion toward more basic things. But I do wonder at what point there's a catalyst of people just saying, boy, this doesn't feel right. Something is wrong in how I'm even getting up in the morning and feeling. And I might have however many friends, but I'm actually alone. And I think there's more for us to talk about and more for us to think about. And the best we can do in some ways, I guess, would be to just continue to be an affirming presence and be open to those encounters and perhaps mentorship and be a catalyst.
Yeah, and I think there's a mental health, an important mental health aspect to it too, that with the crises that's happening in college campuses over mental health, depression, and anxiety, over just the fact that people for the first time are really feeling like they're on their own. They've never experienced conflict or failure. Things haven't been hard because everything was lined up for you before. So I think us as parents, that there's a lot that we can do to get the next generation ready by letting them skin their knee up sometimes, by letting them have a confrontation, to work it out, to fail at things and learn through that failure. And reinforce that it's okay. Not everything has to work out. And there's so many. We could do a whole nother segment on things that you wanted to happen and then they didn't happen, and you look back and you think, oh my gosh, I'm so glad that didn't happen. Look at this other pathway that was so much better. But
Yes.
I think that's missing today. Like, it's just not acceptable. You got to graduate from college and get your dream job right out of college. That's my when I talk to college students, that's the main thing is, don't waste your time waiting around for your dream job, for heaven's sakes. You got to make that future over a long period of time. Right now, take the opportunity that's in front of you and do the very best that you can with that opportunity. And that's going to create so many different places that you can go that you can't even imagine right now. Like, you're thinking too narrowly about what success means right now. Success means you take the opportunity you have and you give it your all as though it was your dream job.
Right.
And then that's going to open up door after door after door for you.
Well, as we wind down on time here, one thing I know that's close to both of our hearts is, how do we sustain good people running for public office, regardless of position or party? Those that strive to have it truly be a service position are going to be emotionally invested. They're going to have exposure personally to the work. They're not going to be hardened to it. So they're going to be more vulnerable to the very things that we're talking about: the toxicity, the division, the frustrations. What would be advice that you'd give to someone who feels that call to serve, but they also have some of that reservations? I can't tell you how many times I've had somebody say, I can't imagine doing what you do. And some of these people would be superb in their community level, county, state, national, whatever. What would be your comments to someone like that?
Yeah, my recommendation always is to start local if you can. Start very local and get experience in dealing with politics at a level where you don't have professional bomb throwers after you. And I'm always impressed when people just, very first office they ever ran for was a state right office or Congress or governor or president, never ran for office, just do it and win. But there's a lot to be said for gaining experience with in a world where there aren't people that are literally doing their job by attacking you. So,
Yeah.
I just think that really does a lot to prepare you for what effective governance means. And it doesn't necessarily mean elected office. Sometimes it's appointed office. There's different things that you can do to get involved in your community. And starting there can give somebody the confidence, like, okay, I can do this. And but if you just kind of jump in at a level where the professional bomb throwers, and when I say I mean literally professional, their profession is to lob grenades at people on the other side of the aisle from them. then it's a shocker at how effective and targeted that those people can be, and how miserable they can make your life.
What would your advice be to those that are members of the public and how they can constructively engage with their elected leaders?
Well, the first thing is to make sure that you don't give them an excuse to assume that you're just out to get them, or that you're not interested in a constructive dialogue. I think the most important thing you can do in when it comes to political influence is to form relationships with people. And for me, even though I represented an area in the legislature that was quite conservative in the political spectrum, even when it's a 62% Republican base, there's still 38% of the people around here that are Democrats. And so forming relationships it's good for the public office holder, but it's also good, I think, for citizens to form that relationship, to be a point where I always tell people, like, if you're a I don't know, a local school teacher, then I think your goal ought to be for when your representative or your senator is voting on something for schools, for the image of you to be in their head. You should know them enough to where they're thinking, oh, Ben's a school teacher. How would this affect Ben? So if you can get to a point where you can, and the thing is, as you would know, like, you can have that level of a relationship with a state representative. You can, they're out there. They do office hours. They go to a bunch of events. They go to the parades. They go to it's like they're out there a lot, mm-hmm. And you can actually have that. If that's your goal, so that they're thinking, oh, I know Ben, and he does this for a living, or this is a cause he really cares about. What would he think about this? That I think that when you reach that level of engagement or relationship with the people that represent you, that's where your influence is through the charts.
I've certainly seen that in my own exposure with people over the years, locally or otherwise. Wise words. How can people reach out to you? You've mentioned that you have a presence on a number of platforms. How could people link up with your communication or fire additional questions your way? I know you're always open to those exchanges.
Yeah, I mean, basically, it's the regulars or the majors, Facebook or Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. I guess would be the ones I'm most active on. So usually, if you just search under my name, you'll find one or two pages that are associated with me. And it's one of the benefits of being in office. They actually put the check by the one that's really me, so the blue check. So you'll know that it's that's the right one. But
real Brian Calley.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So if you just search in my name, it'll probably be among the top that come up. But yeah, I mean, I've got a personal Facebook page. I've got a fan page. The fan page pretty big. It's maybe 110 or 115,000 followers on it. But on Twitter, I'm maybe a little less active. I use Twitter I'm on Twitter every day, but it's mainly, I follow a lot of reporters and I like to see breaking news, and usually it hits there first. So to be really on top of things, that's what I use Twitter for. A lot of my professional stuff on LinkedIn. Instagram is almost all personal. So, on a personal level, if you want to just see, what's going on in Brian Calley's life today, that's the place to see that usually. But, and then Facebook could be anything. It's kind of a catch-all for everything. But yeah, just hit me up there, and would love to see. And if there's a big argument or something, I don't do arguments in the comments. Life's too short for that. So doesn't mean I don't see them, but I don't. I'm not going to spend my day arguing with people. But I'll leave that to you guys that still hold office.
But you discovered one of the secrets to happiness, I think.
Yeah, right. But then the messages and things like that, and a lot of times somebody has something they want to invite me to. It'll come through social media. It's those informal channels end up being pretty effective for them.
Well, thank you very much, Brian. We've been talking to Brian Calley, former Lieutenant Governor for the state of Michigan and currently the president of the Small Business Association of Michigan. Appreciate your time and your insights on civility in public life.
My pleasure. Thanks
And
for having me.
all aspects of life. And I'm Ben Frederick. This is the Ben Asks discussion series. Thanks very much for watching.